You know that exact moment when you open your banking app and your heart doesn't immediately sink? When you're standing in line at the grocery store and you're not doing mental arithmetic to make sure your card won't decline? There's a specific dollar amount where this shift happens, and it's probably not the number you're thinking of. Most people believe financial security starts at six figures, or that you need $250,000 in the bank before anything really changes. But there's a much earlier inflection point that most people miss entirely. A threshold that separates two completely different versions of your financial life. That number is $20,000. My name is Anderson, and I've spent years studying the patterns that separate people who build lasting wealth from people who stay financially fragile their entire lives. Not because I wanted to sell courses or become some kind of money guru, but because I needed to understand it for myself. And if you're someone who's tired of generic advice that assumes you're already comfortable, make sure to subscribe and like this video. I promise we're going somewhere most financial content never goes. Before we talk about why $20,000 matters, I want you to consider something. When you picture wealth building, what do you see? Maybe it's someone born into money who never had to think about rent, or maybe it's someone who got lucky with crypto or stocks. The reality is stranger and more mechanical than either of those stories. Wealth doesn't accumulate in a straight line. There are specific dollar amounts that function like gates. Once you pass through them, the entire system reorganizes around you. The rules literally change, and $20,000 is the first gate that actually opens. Here's a better way to think about it. Imagine you're trying to start a fire with damp wood. You're blowing on the embers, feeding in tiny sticks, watching smoke curl up without any real flame. It's exhausting. You're putting in constant effort for almost no visible result. But if you keep going, eventually something catches. The flame finds dry wood, heat builds on itself. And suddenly the fire is sustaining itself with half the effort you were putting in before. $20,000 is that moment when the flame catches. Everything before it feels like you're fighting entropy. Everything after it feels like the system is finally working with you instead of against you. But here's what makes this truly fascinating. The shift isn't just financial, it's neurological. When you don't have money set aside, your brain operates in constant threat assessment mode. Psychologists have documented this. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for long-term planning and creative thinking, gets overridden by your amygdala, which only cares about immediate danger. You accept the first job offer, even if it's a terrible fit, because waiting feels too dangerous. You stay in relationships that drain you because instability feels scarier than unhappiness. You say yes to commitments you resent because turning down money feels irresponsible. This isn't weakness. It's basic neurobiology. When your brain perceives constant financial threat, it cannot think about growth. It's like trying to write poetry while someone's chasing you with a knife. But when you cross $20,000, something profound shifts in your nervous system. You stop operating from fear. Your brain finally has permission to think beyond next week. Instead of asking, "How do I make it to Friday?" you start asking, "What could I build with this?" Instead of reacting to whatever financial emergency surfaces, you start designing around what you actually want. Studies from behavioral economists show that having just $2,500 in emergency savings increases reported financial well-being by over 20%. Not because $2,500 changes your material reality that much, but because it creates psychological breathing room. When you extend that buffer to 3 to 6 months of living expenses, which for most people lands around $20,000, you get another significant boost. More importantly, your brain shifts from defense to offense. Now, let's talk about the mathematics, because this is where it gets quietly thrilling. Let's say you're saving $1,000 every month and investing it at a conservative 8% annual return. Getting to your first $20,000 takes roughly 19 months, a year and a half of discipline, saying no to things, delaying gratification. It's not glamorous, and frankly, most people quit somewhere in month 7. But Here's the part that changes everything. Your second $20,000 doesn't take another 19 months. It takes about 17, same monthly contribution, same investment strategy, same risk profile, but you just saved 2 full months of time. Why? Because that first $20,000 is now working alongside you, generating its own returns. Think about what that means. You did identical work, but the outcome accelerated just because more of your money was deployed. That's compound interest beginning to tip the scale. By your third $20,000, the timeline compresses further. The same effort you're putting in produces faster results because more capital is compounding in the background. And when you reach truly meaningful portfolio sizes, the acceleration becomes almost absurd. Once you hit $400,000, you can generate another $20,000 in about 5 months without touching your contributions. The amount that once took you nearly 2 years to scrape together is now appearing automatically. That first milestone feels impossibly distant. Every milestone after gets progressively easier. You might be wondering if wealthy people have access to secret investment vehicles that regular people can't touch, some private equity deal or hedge fund strategy that unlocks at certain wealth levels. And while that's somewhat true at the extreme high end, it's not what's driving this phenomenon. The real secret is far simpler and far more empowering. It's just basic arithmetic working in your favor. When you invest $1,000 at a 10% return, you make $100. Take that exact same 10% and apply it to $10,000, and you're looking at $1,000. Same percentage, same timeline, same risk. The only variable is scale. And scale transforms insignificant percentage gains into meaningful dollar amounts. This is why $20,000 feels like an inflection point. Before that, investment returns feel almost symbolic. A 10% return on $2,000 is $200. Nice, sure, but it doesn't change your week. A 10% return on $20,000 is $2,000. That's rent. That's a plane ticket. That's real money with real utility. When you've got $20,000 invested, earning 8% annually, that's $1,600 flowing into your account over the year without you lifting a finger. Money you didn't trade your time for. Money that appeared because your existing money was working independently. The strategy isn't more sophisticated than what someone with $1,000 can use. Same index funds, same platforms, same principles. The only difference is magnitude, and magnitude changes everything. But here's the part most people completely overlook, and it might be the single most important thing I'll say in this entire script. When you save $20,000, you haven't just accumulated money. You've fundamentally rewired your relationship with time, desire, and control. You've built the most critical financial muscle you'll ever develop. Think about what it actually requires to save $20,000 starting from nothing. Unless you're making exceptional money or living rent-free, this demands real sacrifice. You had to track your spending. You had to decline things you wanted. You had to resist impulses. Most crucially, you had to sustain this behavior for months or years without immediate gratification. And here's what that proves. You demonstrated to yourself that you can control your financial trajectory. You became the kind of person who can delay gratification when it matters. That's not just a financial skill, that's an identity shift. This identity transformation affects every decision going forward. Before you had $20,000 saved, buying a $5 latte might have triggered guilt or anxiety about whether you could afford it. After you hit $20,000, you're not agonizing over coffee anymore, not because you have infinite money, but because you've proven you can handle the decisions that actually matter. The small stuff becomes noise. There's another psychological shift that happens here that rarely gets discussed. You start seeing possibilities instead of just problems. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, every unexpected expense feels catastrophic. Your transmission fails, your phone breaks, your rent increases. These aren't opportunities, they're crises that derail your entire month. But when you have $20,000 set aside, these same events become manageable inconveniences. Your transmission fails, frustrating, but you handle it and move on. Your phone breaks, time to get something better. Your rent increases. Maybe it's finally time to negotiate your salary or explore other living situations. Even better, you start noticing opportunities that were invisible before. Your colleague mentions they're launching a side business and looking for early investors. Before, you would have thought, that sounds interesting, and kept scrolling. Now, you can actually evaluate whether it's worth allocating $3,000. A property comes on the market below value because it needs cosmetic work. Before, you would have bookmarked it wistfully. Now you can run the numbers seriously. Your industry has a major conference across the country that could accelerate your career, but your company won't cover it. Before, you would have made excuses. Now you can assess the return on investment. This is what people mean when they say money attracts money. It's not some mystical force. It's that having capital gives you options, and options create leverage to generate more capital. Here's something else that happens around $20,000 that might seem counterintuitive. You start caring less about micro expenses and more about macro decisions. When you're broke, you obsess over every purchase. Should I buy the premium or generic version? Is this coffee worth it when I could make it at home? Should I splurge on the better gas? These micro decisions consume enormous mental energy because every dollar feels precious. But when you have a solid foundation, you realize these choices are largely irrelevant. The difference between buying coffee out versus making it at home might be $800 a year if you're extreme about it. That's not nothing, but it's not going to fundamentally alter your financial trajectory either. What actually matters are the big structural decisions: where you live, what you drive, how much you save, how you invest. These choices swing your net worth by tens or hundreds of thousands over time. So instead of agonizing over organic produce, you focus your energy on optimizing housing costs, maximizing income, and ensuring your investment allocation makes sense. This shift in focus is incredibly liberating. You stop sweating trivial details and start thinking strategically about wealth architecture. Now, let's talk about what happens to your career once you reach this milestone, because this is where the transformation becomes visible to everyone around you. Having $20,000 saved doesn't just change your relationship with money, it changes your relationship with power. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're functionally trapped. Your manager could be incompetent, your workplace could be toxic, the work itself could be soul-destroying. But you can't leave because you need that next direct deposit to survive. This puts you in a catastrophically weak position. You can't ask for a raise because you're terrified they might let you go. You can't push back on unreasonable demands because you need the job more than they need you. You can't explore other opportunities because taking time off to interview feels too risky. You're trapped, and worse, everyone can sense it. But $20,000 changes the entire power structure. Suddenly, you have what I call walking away capital. You could quit today and survive for months while finding something better. This doesn't mean you should be reckless, but it means you're negotiating from strength instead of desperation. This shift affects everything about how you show up. You start requesting the raise you've earned because the worst outcome is they say no, and you'll be fine either way. You push back on unreasonable demands because you're not afraid of consequences anymore. You explore new opportunities because you can afford to take calculated risks. Here's what's remarkable. Often, you never need to use your walking away capital. Just having it transforms your entire presence. You become more confident, more assertive, more willing to take on challenging projects. And when you show up differently, people respond differently. You start getting better assignments, more visibility, and yes, more compensation. It's like possessing a hidden weapon you hope you never have to deploy, but knowing it's there fundamentally changes how you operate. And the more confident you become, the faster you build wealth, which gives you even more options. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that accelerates over time. But here's where most people sabotage themselves, and I see it constantly. They reach $20,000, feel that psychological shift, and immediately destroy it on something that feels justified. Maybe they decide they've earned a new car after all that discipline, or they take an expensive trip because they've sacrificed so much, or they use it for a down payment on a house they can barely afford. Don't do this. That $20,000 isn't a prize, it's a seed. It's the foundation of everything you'll build financially for the rest of your life. It's what grows into true independence if you're patient enough to let it compound. Here's something that will either make you laugh or make you angry. The average American spends more on vehicles over their lifetime than it would cost to achieve complete financial freedom. Between payments, insurance, maintenance, and fuel, most people are spending $700 to $900 monthly on transportation. Over 40 years, that's easily $450,000 just to move from place to place. Meanwhile, they're complaining they can't afford to invest for retirement. The moment you drive a new car off the lot, it loses roughly 20% of its value. You're not just spending money, you're actively incinerating wealth. Compare that to investing the same amount in diversified assets. Instead of watching value evaporate, you're watching it multiply. I understand. Cars are emotional. You want reliability. You want something that reflects success. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you understand the trade-off. That car payment might make you feel wealthy today, but it's actually preventing you from becoming wealthy tomorrow. This is where having $20,000 saved fundamentally changes your perspective on major purchases. Instead of asking, "Can I afford the monthly payment?" you start asking, "What is this costing me in future opportunity?" That $35,000 car isn't just $35,000. It's $35,000 that could have grown to over $240,000 in your investment account over 25 years. Suddenly, driving a reliable used vehicle doesn't feel like deprivation. It feels like a strategic decision that's funding your future autonomy. And here's the beautiful irony. The person driving the brand new SUV is probably stressed about money. The person driving the older Camry is quietly building wealth and sleeping soundly at night. This mindset extends to every major financial decision: housing, education, travel, hobbies. Everything gets filtered through the lens of opportunity cost, not in a joyless, obsessive way, but in an intentional way that ensures your money is going toward things that genuinely matter to you. And here's something that might surprise you. Once you start thinking this way, you often discover you don't actually want half the things you thought you wanted. That bigger apartment? The extra space would be nice, but is it worth delaying financial independence by 4 years? That expensive hobby? It's enjoyable, but are there cheaper ways to get the same satisfaction? This isn't about becoming someone who denies themselves everything. It's about becoming someone who makes deliberate choices instead of letting money leak away unconsciously. When you have clear financial objectives and understand compound growth, it becomes much easier to distinguish between what you want in the moment and what you actually value long term. Look, $20,000 won't make you rich overnight, but it will fundamentally transform how you think about money, time, and possibility. It's the difference between surviving and designing, between reacting to life and authoring it. Start building that foundation now, because your future self is counting on the decisions you make today. And trust me, they'll be grateful you did.